Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ali, and this is my teammate Vladimir. We're Group 1, and our project is forecasting New Zealand's gross domestic product. First, what is the GDP? The GDP measures the total monetary value of all goods and services produced within a country within a specific time period. So this serves as a benchmark for measuring the economic health and performance of a country. And of course, such an important benchmark would be a useful thing to forecast for policymakers, businesses, and investors. Main research questions for our project. Number one, how's the GDP trended over the past 2 decades in New Zealand? How's GDP growth trended? 2, how well do various forecasting methods perform in forecasting the GDP? 3, how well do pre-trained LLM time series models perform in forecasting the GDP growth, and how do they compare to more traditional methods? 4, can multiple models be combined together to make more accurate predictions? For our modeling, we use the data set of indicators spanning from first quarter 2001 to last quarter 2024, included a wide range of indicators like wage growth, inflation, new dwellings consented, migration, etc. We trained XGBoost, Serimax, Amazon Chronos, Random Forest, AdaBoost, and dynamic factor models. We trained and evaluated all of those models using an expanding window approach to forecast GDP quarterly. And we use 3 main metrics to evaluate our models. That's root mean squared error, mean absolute error, and mean absolute scaled error. Right, so our findings. Overall, the trend of GDP growth showed that the growth mostly ranged between 0 to 5% up until the global financial crisis, where of course there was a major dip. Then after that, it sort of stabilized until around 2020, of course, COVID-19. So there was a major dip and then a major skyrocket to around 17%. And since then, GDP growth hasn't quite stabilized. It's still quite volatile. In terms of our models, the XGBoost and Serimax models performed quite well. Of course, though, they struggled with the major dip seen during the COVID era. The Amazon Chronos models were a different story. We made 2 versions of the model, one which forecasted 1 quarter ahead and one which forecasted 2 quarters ahead. So the one which forecast 1 quarter ahead was quite accurate in certain periods, especially year 2019, we found. But it didn't quite capture the trend of GDP well. Version 2, the one that forecast 2 quarters ahead, also did not quite capture the trend well, and its predictions were much more smoothed compared to the first version of the model. And now I'll hand it over to Vladimir to go through the results of the Random Forest, AdaBoost, and dynamic factor models. Vladimir.
Good afternoon. My name is Vladimir, and I'm going to talk about 3 models that we played with Random Forest, AdaBoost, and dynamic factor. And comparing performance of those 3 models, Random Forest and AdaBoost actually were the best ones, and they worked much better than a naive model that we compared with. And of course, we did some feature selection and feature engineering because those models were not working successfully with just taking all features, but we have to select a few features, and they work pretty well on them. For dynamic factor model, actually, it's supposed to be one of the best models to work with time series data, but in our case, it worked pretty good for the data, but not picking up the spikes during the COVID times when it went up and down by 10% and 10% down, 10% up. So we decided to stay on Random Forest and AdaBoost for ensembling models. And with that, I'll give it back to Ali.
Thanks, Vladimir. All right, that brings us to the ensemble models that we made. So up to this point, we saw that most of the models could forecast the GDP growth accurately, but they each had their own strengths and weaknesses. So what I thought of was we could combine the predictions of each model, the strongest models, and average their predictions to get more accurate predictions. So it's an ensemble model. And we created two of these ensemble models. One was using the Ceramax, so that's seasonal autoregressive integrated moving average with exogenous variables. And we also used the XGBoost model. And we also made another model which used random forest and AdaBoost. Now, both models performed quite well. Model 1 particularly was particularly strong in forecasting the more recent GDP growth trends from 2022 onwards. And since these were the most powerful models we created, we chose to integrate these into our Streamlit app. We also compared these ensemble models' forecasting accuracy to the forecasts from previous forecasts from major banks like ANZ and ASB, as well as the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD. We compared the forecasting accuracy from the time period of fourth quarter 2021 to fourth quarter 2024. And we specifically compared the root mean squared error and the mean absolute error. And here are our results. In the top left, we got ANZ's forecasts compared to the real GDP, which is in blue. We got the ASB forecast on the top right, OECD forecast middle left, the Ceramax XGBoost model forecasts middle right, and the random forest and AdaBoost forecasts at the bottom. The Ceramax and XGBoost model outperformed OECD and ASB's bank forecast in terms of accuracy, but was slightly behind ANZ. And the random forest and AdaBoost ensemble model was slightly less accurate than ASB and outperformed the OECD forecasts. That brings us to our Streamlit app demonstration. I'll just bring it up here. Right. So over here, we have a graph on the right, which shows the model's forecast. Now this updates in real time. So we have to input the input predictor values. Right now, this isn't representative of the actual forecast. So we've put in a handy button here, which fills it with the latest values. And now it's got the GDP in third quarter 2024, fourth quarter 2024, and then the forecast for first quarter 2025. Now this forecasts a 0.836% year-on-year growth for next quarter. This is with the Ceramax and XGBoost model. And I'll leave it to Vladimir to show off the second ensemble model, which uses random forest and AdaBoost.
Okay, so switching to the second ensemble, and also using the latest data, latest values. So we decided to use two features, which is export prices and migration, and model pretty much reacts to any changes in those numbers. So it's also updated with the changes in number of migrations. And the same is for export prices. Okay, back to Anatoly.
Thank you, Vladimir. All right, so that was our Streamlit app. Now, reflecting back on the project, I can say that it was overall successful. We successfully forecasted New Zealand's gross domestic product growth quite accurately. Thing we learned in this project is that ensembling the models resulted in more accurate forecasts than using just single models. One major limitation with the pre-trained LLM time series forecasting model, which is Amazon Chronos that we used, was this inability to include exogenous variables. Now, we use the non-subscription-based version. The subscription-based version is the only one that allows you to put exogenous variables. So that was a major limitation of the model we used in the project. So future work could explore integrating exogenous variables into the pre-trained LLM model and assessing its effects on the model's accuracy. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you. If you have any questions? If anyone has any questions, just let us know.
Yeah, very good. Finished in 10 minutes as well.
I think she has a question.
Which factors did you find to be most influential on GDP growth, which helped you make the predictions?
Yes. So going back to the previous slide here. Overall export prices and import, I haven't listed it on this slide, but in overall the export prices and import prices, as well as new dwelling consents, ended up being quite strong features for predicting the GDP growth quite accurately. We also engineered a feature which was called the spike indicator. So we basically just looked back at the GDP growth in the past 2 quarters. And if we saw that the change in growth was quite a lot, that would kind of indicate a spike was going to happen in the next quarter. And that also boosted the accuracy of our models.
And also I can add that for adaptive boosting, migration data was also one of the features that actually were very important to improve the performance of the model.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else?
Is there any further updates for your project? Maybe in the future, what features you're gonna add into this project?
In terms of the future work on this project, yeah, like I said, I would consider further exploring the LLM models more, just to see how including exogenous variables would affect its accuracy. Some other things, I might try out a few other algorithms, maybe try and get a model that outperforms A and Z in terms of accuracy. Any other questions?
I've got a couple. First of all, well done.
Thank you.
This was a difficult problem. I know, because I do this kind of stuff. And Justin knows it as well, because Justin's been doing this sort of work as well recently. You've had to learn a lot to do forecasting and to do it properly, so I commend you for that. In terms of the features that you used, were you just using raw values of those features, or were you somehow I know you engineered a new feature, but were the raw feature values inputs into forecast for the next quarter? Is that how you did the forecasting?
Yeah, we used the raw data.
And you said, was it migration and export price? Those two were the strongest.
Yeah. And actually export and import prices are very closely correlated.
Yeah. Now, did you consider the lag, the reporting lag problem as well? Because, for example, if you want to predict, let's say, the GDP of this current quarter, which is going to be 30th of June, so that's Q2, you actually don't have immigration values as they are right now. So that's the problem we face in economic forecasting. These variables really lag, sometimes quite considerably, sometimes like 4 months or so. So that's one of the problems. Like if you're doing a retrospective analysis where you ignoring the lag problem, you can quite often get good accuracy.
Right. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, go on.
We actually lagged all of the input predictors by 1 quarter back.
Okay, good. So you line them properly, because oftentimes once you understand what the values are for those features, it's not too hard to actually predict the the GDP value. But the problem is you just don't know the value of those proxies, those factors at the time when you want to make the forecast. Okay, good. Round of applause. Well done.